Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 18th of March 2025. There's a vast amount of information to get through, as ever. Every day at the moment is packed because peace negotiations are going on in the context of the wider geopolitical movements, the shifting sands of international politics that concern the war in Ukraine, but also adjacent to the war in Ukraine that might have an impact. So there's always a lot to go through at the moment. These videos get longer because everything's relevant. So I'll try and press through at a snip. Starting with, European countries are reportedly holding behind-the-scenes talks on large-scale seizures of Moscow's oil exporting tankers in the Baltic Sea. They're currently drafting new legislation to add legal heft to those efforts, says a Business Ukraine mag, quoting from Politico, inside the new plan to seize Russia's shadow fleet. I'm not going to go into the details of that due to time reasons, but keep an eye on that. That's important. That would be really significant. It looks like Europe is really stepping up. The US really stepping back from putting pressure on Russia. The UK and the EU are discussing seizing Russian assets to increase Ukraine military funding. So these will be those assets that are being used to underwrite loans to Ukraine. It's about seizing them fully. There are more and more people talking about or putting pressure on the decision makers concerning releasing those assets in full. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy and EU diplomat Kaja Kallas will meet on the 18th of March, which is today, in London to discuss boosting European defence funding. There's been a lot of talk on funding over the last couple of days. Now, a slight worry here. A few analysts, Edward Hunter Christie, here we've got Chrissy Linnett saying for 2 years, Giorgia Meloni, so she's the premier in Italy, has been a stateswoman voicing strong Italian support for Ukraine. Now there is clearly a change in attitude, so this is a worry. From the decision to not participate in the peacekeeping force to reluctance to approve aid, something doesn't smell good. She's in a very difficult position. She's in a coalition with two other parties. These are very right-wing parties in Italy. Brothers of Italy is her party. Then there's Forza Italia and Matteo Salvini, her number twos. La Liga, that are basically pro-Russian, and she's pro-Ukraine but in coalition with two pro-Russian parties. And Italy has actually got quite a compromised, I would say, political landscape as a result of that, but also the electorate is somewhat divided on Russia, like in ways that you wouldn't expect and you don't see in the rest of Europe. When you look at some of the polling, so it's an interesting place, Italy. They haven't matched their rhetoric with actions. As Edward Hunter Christie says, Italy is traditionally soft on Russia, but Meloni may furthermore be willingly vulnerable to pressure from Donald Trump. So she's seen as this potential candidate for whispering in Trump's ear because she comes from the populist right. But it could be that direction of influences, or the influence has gone in the other direction. In my view, Europeans, says Edward Hunter Christie, Europeans should consider strong measures to expel both Russian and American political influences. This is an idea we're going to be returning to an awful lot, which is the division between allies, erstwhile allies. The US appears to have changed sides, and, it's all concerning that, isn't it? Budapest in Hungary. So I already reported on this huge crowds came out demanding that Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary, the prime minister there, resigns. Huge crowds. Now, they brought out a referendum on Ukraine's EU membership. This is something Viktor Orban said he would do, and this has led to European politicians saying that there should be an EU-wide referendum on whether Hungary should stay in the EU, not about whether Ukraine should come into the EU. But that's an interesting retort. The ballot has only one question. Do you support Ukraine joining the European Union? The answer, yes or no. The options being yes or no. Quite a simple referendum question that will be put to the Hungarian people. Radislav Sikorski, foreign minister from Poland, said Hungary is blocking the start of negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the EU. We feel a special responsibility for this. Of course, we would like to open a 1 or 2 negotiation clusters. These have fallen through, apparently. There's been some issues with negotiation clusters regarding Ukraine's accession to the EU. They've complained about that. But unfortunately, the decision is being blocked by a longtime friend and former ally. Hungary is playing very, very difficult there with the potential EU accession of Ukraine. Timothy Snyder, then we're going to move on from Hungary to Serbia, where we saw those massive crowds, even greater crowds than were in Bucharest, particularly in Serbia, seeing huge crowds. Timothy Snyder says about a sixth of the total population of Serbia protested government malfeasance today. In the US, that would be more than 50 million people coming out. That would just be insane. Absolutely incredible. He goes on to say, where's the rest of that? Oh, no, it's not the rest of that. He doesn't go on to say anything. Now, concerning that protest or the march or whatever you want to call it, it was incredible to see this. So it's reported that yesterday, this would be 2 days ago, police used long-range acoustic devices against protesters in Serbia. These devices are a type of specialized loudspeaker that produces sound at an extremely high decibel capacity, up to 160 decibels. It's been known to cause permanent hearing damage. Just look at this. Really scary. That's how you can disperse crowds. And that is going to be, I guess, utilised more often against such crowds. That is a bit of a challenge. Governments who use these such technology on their own people should not be governments for long, says someone there. Now, around 10% of Serbia's population joined that anti-government protest. Those protests, I presume, not just in Bucharest. According to organisers, they claim it was one of the largest. So here they say 10%. Timothy Snyder 1 in 6, which is higher. That's 17%, broadly speaking. They claim it was the largest demonstration in the country's history. International media call it the biggest protest since Milosevic's overthrow. Some absolutely stunning pictures coming out of Serbia to document those huge protests. Absolutely incredible. Now, talking about the energy weapon, here we have Ryan Macbeth giving his tuppence.
What weapon was used against these Serbian protesters in Belgrade today? My guess is that it's something like
a Serbian version of the American active denial system.
This system basically shoots out millimeter-length microwaves and kind of works like a microwave. The idea is that these radio waves penetrate about 1/64 of an inch into your skin, right where the pain receptors are. They light up those pain receptors with a feeling of like standing next to an oven that's just been opened. And the idea is that this makes people not want to be there anymore, but theoretically causes no permanent damage. So it could be considered a more humane way of doing crowd control than using tear gas or using water cannons or using beanbag or stinger rounds that, if you aim them in the wrong place, could cause permanent physical damage. The disadvantage of the system is that it could cause panic and could cause people to get trampled when they're running away from that source of heat.
So it might not be audio, it might be a microwave weapon there, but interesting that could be first time we've seen that being utilised in such a way. Vučić, the president of Serbia, has addressed the nation. He accused external forces of organising the rallies. He regrets pardoning people who were previously arrested at such rallies, and he's thanked police for maintaining security and threatens protesters with a tough response if they break the law. So it could be trying to get harsh on the protesters. But if there are that many protesters, there could be some problems there for Vučić. Now, in Georgia, and I'm going to be speaking to a Georgian on Friday, 2 o'clock, so UK time, so please check that live. Georgia has sentenced its ex-president, Saakashvili, who is in hospital and who has been very close to dying for a very long time because of health issues potentially brought on by the Georgian state. He's been sentenced to a further 4.5 years for an illegal border crossing. The ruling follows a prison sentence issued last week on state funds embezzlement charges, meaning that Saakashvili was ultimately sentenced to 12 years and 6 months in prison, the court ruled. I mean, they're just trying everything they can not to allow that man ever to get out of prison or indeed hospital. Now, Romania, we're going to turn our emphasis there, focus there, because actually, I've been talking about the Romanian elections, presidential elections that are taking place there, and we've already seen the first iteration of them cancelled, postponed. Romania is super, super important. And it's important because it's easy to forget that actually, yes, it borders Ukraine, Moldova, but it's on the Black Sea. And if Russia controls Romania, it controls even more of the Black Sea. So you've got Russia itself, then you've got Georgia, then you've got Romania. Putin's task in Romania is the mouth of the Danube. And as a result, so the River Danube then is one of the supply routes of weapons, I would have thought, and grain, and exports and imports that have struggled to get out of the Black Sea. The Danube was incredibly important. Romania has been incredibly important as a country, both river trade and land-based trade, railway and road. So if they get control, if Russia effectively gets control of the Danube, then it has almost complete control over the important river artery of Europe, and therefore Europe and the Black Sea. Hence the Kremlin's bitterness over the issue of the Romanian elections. In this scheme, the most important section is Odessa, without which Moscow will not be able to fully control the Danube Black Sea section. Therefore, effective resistance to all types of Russian aggression in this region is a dual task for the Ukraine-Romania EU format. And actually, we're going to return to Odessa in the peace section in a second, because there are claims that Russia might be putting Odessa on the table for negotiations with regard to, obviously, Ukraine, but to the US. And if that's the case, Ukraine's clearly going to say no, but it could be a stick with which the US can hit Ukraine. Now, we talked previously about Mark Rutte, the Secretary General for NATO and the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands. He then talked the other day about that being off the table, accession to NATO being off the table for Ukrainian negotiations. And I was saying that he's almost certainly just had a load of pressure put on him by Trump and the American team. You could argue there was an element of realism there, which is that if the US doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO, they're not going to join NATO. You have to have unanimity, and you've already got Slovakia and Hungary pushing back. So it could just be like, okay, let's just do what the US is stating, because actually I've got an awful lot of needs, says Mark Rutte, about NATO regarding Ukraine and the continued existence of NATO that I need to be concerned with. And it might be a case of give and take here. Now, as a Dutch person, so this is Arturo Bianco saying, as a Dutch person, we have, or as Dutch people, we have plenty of experience with Rutte. Don't think for a minute that Ukraine will ever join NATO, that they will never join NATO, is a real statement. This is just keeping the USA aboard for now. Get a president in the USA that supports the idea, and Rutte will be pushing for it. The guy is very good at seeing reality, which is Ukraine isn't going to going into NATO as long as Trump is around, which is ultimately going to be true, right? So he won't put any effort into that. He is also reasonably good in keeping impossible coalitions together and getting what he wants, which is right now in keeping NATO alive, which is not so good for Ukraine. But since he is pro-Ukraine, it ain't all that bad. If he can help keep the sanctions alive in the US and can keep whispering in Trump's ear that not letting Russia win is a good thing, he will have done his job. To be fair, that's pretty much the best we can hope for with Trump in charge. And actually that, I think, is a really interesting statement there. And it could be that rather than slag Rutte off to the hilt, as I have done, and many I've seen on Twitter and Blue Sky, it could be that he's playing a clever game there. It might not be, right? We might have great justification for criticising Mark Rutte. But it could be that actually he's about picking your fights. Same with all aspects of life. Pick your fights. Make sure that you're focusing on the ones you can win. And the ones you can't, be okay with giving them up. in light of a greater goal. So that could be what Mark Rutte's doing there, but correct me if you think I'm wrong. Now we go to peace negotiations, and we're going to start this whole section on peace negotiations with seeing kind of where the US is at, because they are the ones that they've taken it upon themselves to negotiate on behalf of and over the heads of Ukraine, directly with Russia. And this is what they think.
Caroline, thank you so much. You mentioned earlier in the briefing that you guys are at the 10-yard line of peace. Given the amount of progress that you've made in such a short amount of time,
oh, yeah, okay.
Is that an indictment of the previous administration's foreign policy stance? And is it just more proof that you need to talk to people to sort of get things done?
I think so. I think the previous administration is the reason this war began. As President Trump often says, this war would have never started if he were still in office. It only started because of the incompetence and the weakness of the previous administration. And President Trump is very proud of the progress that he and his team have made in such a short amount of time. And hopefully tomorrow that progress will move forward.
This is incredibly irresponsible. So on the one hand, it's excusing and almost maybe justifying the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians by saying it is fully their own fault. It's the US eating itself because they'd rather own the libs than have a unified foreign policy whereby the US understands very firmly that Russia are the bad guys. Now Russia are not the bad guys. The bad guys, like Trump said before he was elected, the biggest enemy is the enemy from within. So he sees the libs and they see the libs as the enemies, and Joe Biden represents all that is bad with the United States. So therefore it was his fault that the war in Ukraine started. It was Biden's fault that Putin invaded Ukraine. That was Biden's fault. And what's happening here is, we could get all philosophical about causality and, almost taking away agency from Russia and talking about maybe a lack of agency as being more responsible than agency. But what we can be certain of is that Trump and his administration see the Democrats as more of a threat to the United States than Russia. That's where we are. So with that in mind, you then need to understand what's going on with negotiations. So Trump is going to go to Putin, kind of almost excited to speak to Putin. This is a strong man that he actually looks up to. And he's going to be negotiating with Putin today on the telephone. The 2-hour conversation is potentially on the cards, potentially 2 hours. And we have a person who is very sympathetic to the Russians and not to the Ukrainians. This is not looking good. And then you're thinking, okay, so is he going to go in with the requisite knowledge? And I've talked about this, about how Trump does not have the knowledge about Ukraine that he needs to have, about Russia, about geopolitics that he needs to have. We're going to come to that idea again in a little while because Fiona Hill has pretty much said exactly that. Where's he getting his knowledge from? Well, we know that Tulsi Gabbard yesterday regurgitated the talking points, Putin talking points with regard to Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, etc., etc. She retweeted a person who writes for Russia Today, a right-wing, I would say, pretty extreme tweeter, if you like, on X, on Twitter, Ian Mars Chung, who is a terrible human being, like full stop, terrible, terrible person. And the Director of National Intelligence is using him as a source, pretty much. Tulsi Gabbard has also said yesterday that Trump and Putin are very good friends. So not only is she reiterating this anti-American nonsense from Ian Mars Chung, the US Director of National Intelligence is retweeting a far-right conspiracy theorist based in Malaysia. Our DNI retweets this, incredible, say a couple of people there. But she's saying that Trump and Putin are very good friends, which doesn't give you very much confidence that Trump is going to go into that conversation wanting to hold Putin to account. There's absolutely no evidence at all whatsoever from the last 8 weeks and for the last 8 months that Trump will do anything to make life difficult for Russia and for Putin. he will roll over and have his belly tickled by Putin. Shashank Joshi saying, the defense correspondent for The Economist says, imagine having the resources of 18 different intelligence agencies at your disposal and instead getting your news from and actively amplifying a far-right grifter who is also an RT columnist. The best case scenario for the DNI is that she is kept well away from any actual decisions. The most we can hope for, or the most that Americans can hope for who are serious about foreign policy and about American security, is that she is actually just shut off from the real machinations and personnel of these intelligence agencies, that they just feed her stuff that they can get away with feeding her, but carry on doing the really important work that they do. And meanwhile, she goes and hobnobs with Jackson Hinkle. Jackson Hinkle is an absolutely terrible human being. He is a pro-Russian American who, for a time, was dating Miss Russia. He has actually started advocating openly for communism and the American Communist Party. He has visited the Donbass. He is like complete pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine guy. Like as anti-Ukraine as you can get. That's Jackson Hinkle. That's who she was hanging around with this weekend. That's a director of national intelligence for the United States in charge, overseeing 18 different intelligence agencies. That's who she's wandering around with. This is a guy who said that the US should bomb London. So then, when you're trying to work out what Trump is going to be saying in a conversation with Putin, if his top people around him are people like Tulsi Gabbard, you're in a heck of a lot. I mean, I want to swear here, but you're in an awful lot of trouble. Fiona Hill says this. So actually, let's go into the article, at least in Huffington Post. It's not the original interview that she's done with the Foreign Affairs magazine, but a YouTube interview, I'm sure well worth watching. I haven't had time to watch that yet, but that is on my list. Fiona Hill, a former senior National Security Council official, an expert on European and Russian affairs, has revealed new insights into President Trump's previous interactions with Putin and how she believes Putin actually mocked Trump during their exchanges. In a lengthy interview with Foreign Affairs released Thursday, Hill described Trump as unprepared for meetings. This was actually more than what she says later. This, to me, is the single most important revelation, certainly from this short article. That Trump is unprepared when he goes into meetings. He doesn't take intelligence briefings. He doesn't read. As I said yesterday, there are claims that he's never even read his own book that was ghostwritten for him, The Art of the Deal. There are claims that he's never read that book. He doesn't read. He doesn't receive intelligence briefings. Where is he getting his information from? The people that speak to him, who are they? Tulsi Gabbard, Stephen Miller, these like really, really problematic people. So, Hill described Trump as unprepared for meetings with his Russian counterpart. This was in Trump 1.0, and overly fixated on personal interactions rather than diplomatic strategy. He's real surface level gumph, Trump. He talks about how we get on really well, how we talk about rather than the actual strategy of how the frick to solve geopolitical issues, like policy. He doesn't do that. I keep telling you, he is fundamentally ignorant. And I'm not trying to insult him. It's just technically he doesn't know the stuff he needs to know. And he fixates on the wrong things. He is all about bluster. You listen to 100% of his rallies and speeches, and you tell me one time he has given you a solid grasp of policy, of data, of intricate information. You tell me one time he's got up there and expressed a fundamental wealth of knowledge on a particular subject. Never has he done that, ever. Never has he done that. The man is surface level. I'm the greatest. I'm do this. I know more about everything than anyone, whilst not knowing anything about anything. And then blinding people with just mere assertion. So, quote, the very first time I was in one of the phone calls with Putin, I was listening very carefully to the Russian. because the interpreters don't always capture everything. They don't capture the nuances, particularly when it's the Russian interpreter who's translating into a language that's not their native language. All kinds of things are missing, she remembered. Trump, who for years has expressed his admiration for Putin and has recently parroted Russian talking points in his bid to broker a peace deal to end Russia's invasion of neighbouring Ukraine, described the exchange as great, she said. But Hill recalled thinking that it really wasn't. Quote, there was all kinds of menace in what Putin had said. He chooses his words very carefully, she explained. Many times when Putin and Trump are interacting, Putin's actually making fun of him. She continued, it's completely lost in the translation. I can give lots of episodes of this, or he's goading him and urging him onto something, because he's trying to see how he'll react, and the translation smooths over all of that. That context is absolutely missing, and he doesn't do a readout afterwards. All of this is amateur hour, added Hill, who is now a senior foreign policy fellow at the US and Europe at Washington-based think tank Brookings, the Brookings Institute. Wow. And that tracks with everything I think that we know about Trump. Take, for example, what he said last night. And this was just, again, he's got a fundamental lack of knowledge. We know this is not true because we follow these things better than he does.
I'm speaking with President Putin of Russia to save some soldiers who are in deep trouble. They're captured. Essentially, they're surrounded by Russian soldiers. So I give you a lot of different things in one news conference, but it's a big deal. They're surrounded by...
It's just really interesting. Concentrate on little things. I give you lots of things. In like his simplistic language, he can't really express very complex... Well, he can't express thoughts in very complex ways. Like the sentence construction and the choice of words means that people have analysed his language as being whatever grader level in the US as being very, very simplistic. But if you're just taking the ideas from what he says, you think, oh, Trump's amazing. He does this. He's giving us all this information in this conference. But actually, what he does is just give you kind of fluff and guff and, really unjustified mere assertions that are fairly simplistic. Oh, thousands of Ukrainian soldiers surrounded, and if it wasn't for me, they'd all be dead. Okay, well, where's the true detail about this? Well, where exactly? Tell me what happened.
Russian soldiers, and I believe if it wasn't for me, they wouldn't be here any longer. I was able to get them not to do anything at this moment, but it's a bad situation in Russia.
What Trump is amazing at, he absolutely is the best in the world at, and this is part of his narcissism, is saying he's responsible for all the wonderful things and he's never responsible for all the bad things. So, in anything that's happening in the government at the moment that's bad, it's Biden's fault, and everything that's good, it's his fault. It's his fault. So he's like, if it wasn't for me, thousands of Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk would have died. I got them to stop. Now, as I said to you in the video this morning, this is a really worrying claim that he's making, because it's not just that. You put it together with a video that came out of a Russian soldier saying that I've been ordered not to attack Ukrainians who are retreating. And then you have a created out of nothing, a false concession from Russia. So when people are attacking Trump for not getting any concessions out of Russia, he can turn around and say, I got them to not kill thousands of Ukrainians. It was me who got them to do that. That's a concession. I saved the lives of thousands of Ukrainians. So there is your big concession from Russia. But that never happened. That's a lie. So the only concession is a non-concession. Anyway, we'll go on. By listening to more of what he said.
We had to get Ukraine to do the right thing. It was not an easy situation. You got to see a little glimpse at the Oval Office. But I think they're doing the right thing right now, and we're trying to get a peace agreement done. We want to get a ceasefire and then a peace agreement.
So because of noise reduction, as you heard from the previous clip, there's loads of background noise. You can't really hear what she says. The noise reduction software takes out her speech, but his reply.
Awesome.
No, not at all. No, not really the opposite. I think it was appreciated. And we have to understand, and you have to understand, that if I see somebody doing something bad that's going to cause a lot of death, the only reason I'm involved, and this is Russia and Ukraine, but a lot of people, it's humanity. I'm involved for humanity. A lot of
It's all, I'm so wonderful. I'm just doing this for humanity. I'm doing it for the love of people. I'm turning off Ukraine's access to military aid and intelligence for the love of people, so that, you know, it's only Ukrainians who die. We don't want Russians dying. I'm doing it for the love of people. Great people on both sides, but mainly I want to just keep the Russians alive. But great people on both sides. Anyway, doing it for humanity. Oh, a load of Ukrainians died as a result of what I did for humanity, but I'm doing it for humanity. Yeah, whatever. Now, a lot of people are using that interview or that presser speech or whatever as evidence that what happened in the Oval Office with Zelensky was part of a strategy, part of a plan, because he said, you know, we got them to do the right thing, you know, etc., etc. We had to get them to do the right thing. That's what happened in the Oval Office. So lots of people saying that gives evidence towards the theory that it was all pre-planned what happened in the Oval Office. Now, the reaction to some of these, well, in this case, that presser, the reaction to that presser and some of the claims I was just making have been that Ukrainian media have reported them initially like this. So Ukrainska Pravda said Trump admits a spat with Zelensky in the Oval Office was part of pressure on Ukraine. With their title, Trump admits spat with Zelensky in the Oval Office was part of pressure on Ukraine. And then US President Donald Trump has confirmed that his spat with Zelensky during the Ukrainian president's visit to Oval Office was part of the strategy, blah, blah, blah. And then they've had to tone that down. So the left image is the initial title of Ukrainian media article about Trump's motivation for berating Zelensky in the Oval Office, and the right image is a hastily revised and more diplomatic version of the article, likely following frantic phone calls with the Ukrainian government. That's how much pressure there is on Ukraine. So then that gets turned into Trump comments on spat with Zelensky in Oval Office. We had to get Ukraine to do the right thing. And that, you know, this sort of thing happens, but it just gives you a window into some of what's going on with regard to what Trump says. And of course, he just keeps saying really problematic things for Ukraine. As Adam Kinzinger says, former Republican lawmaker, Ukraine, just say no to this. Europe, you got to step up. This is Trump, I think, probably on Air Force One. And I'm obviously going to have to ramp up the sounds of this. Okay, I think after talking a little bit about golf, he says this.
We learned a lot. We're doing pretty well, I think, with Russia. And we'll see if we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
What sort of concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get it?
What sort of concessions are you seeking Putin to have? Exactly the question that needs to be put to Trump more often.
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be.
That's not a concession to Putin.
Talking about land.
Well, it's a concession to Putin. It's not a concession that Putin will be making.
We'll be talking about power plants, because that's up, it's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets.
Dividing up certain assets. So let's go back to Doris. Poor old Doris has her house invaded by thugs. Police come along or neighbours come along and say, hey, there's too much noise coming from here. I don't want any noise. Remember, I'm doing this all on behalf of neighbours and noise. I just want everyone to just have a quiet time. I'm doing this on behalf of noise humanity. So just keep the noise down. And in order to keep the noise down, you guys need to stop arguing. Doris is going, hang on, they're in my frickin' house. They're in my house, Don. They've invaded my house. They could do this to anyone's house. Yeah. But Doris, just shh. What I want you to do, Doris, is what we're gonna do is divide up certain assets here. So, unfortunately for you, Doris, these thugs are gonna keep hold of most of the ground floor, and that includes your kitchens. So you're gonna lose your dishwasher. You're gonna lose your cooker. In fact, a lot of your energy appliances here are going to go to the thugs because that's where they are. They're hanging around the kitchen mainly at the moment and the living room. So you're going to lose some of that. You're going to have to stay upstairs now, Doris, for most of the time. Might allow you to use the downstairs toilet, but mainly you've got to stay upstairs. Doris is going nuts here. They've invaded. What are you doing coming around here and giving away? Yeah, I'm, both sides. I'm working on behalf of both of you here. I'm not on your side, Doris, and I'm not on their side. I'm neutral. And I want to just be the mediator here. Yeah, but what about the morality of what's that? Yeah, morality, schmorality. Whatever. Morality. Just talk about keeping this place fucking quiet, right? I'm living over there, and all I'm hearing is like, from people whinging about Doris's house being invaded. So let's just bring an end to it as quickly as possible and just make sure that these guys are happy with what they've got, and we've divided up your assets accordingly. So you're okay? You guys are okay? Yeah, I know you guys are okay because we've been talking, haven't we? We were sorry, Doris, but just to let you know, I've been meeting with these guys. I invited them around for coffee, and we're cool. We're cool about all of this. So it's just making sure that you're cool about it. What's that, Doris? You're not cool about it? You're going to keep fighting them? Well, in that case, I'm going to walk over and punch you in the face. If you're not cool with these guys having your assets and your property, I will start putting pressure on you. How dare you? How dare you say that these guys aren't entitled to your bottom floor? How dare you say they can't have your oven and your refrigerator? Prove me wrong. That's how disgusting the United States administration is being. So we're hearing from Semaphore that Trump administration is considering recognizing Ukraine's Crimea region. Just, Doris, I'm recognizing your lounge as now Thugtopia. This is now Thugtopia. I'm just recognizing it officially. And of course, the problem is, like I explained in a lengthy thread earlier, that actually that goes against the whole doctrine of the American government for the last 93 years or something. That will be, if that is actually what happens, that is a real game changer in American policy. And of course it paves the way for the US to move into Greenland, Panama and Canada, even, if they so wanted. Now, Ukraine have said back that their territorial integrity is not up for negotiation. Doris says, no, I ain't taking this. While we currently lack the military capability to liberate all occupied territories, they will remain temporarily occupied until we reclaim them, either militarily or diplomatically. Concessions are not an option. Quote from the Semaphore article: the Trump administration is considering recognizing Ukraine's Crimea region as Russian territory as part of any future agreement to end Moscow's war in Kyiv, according to two people familiar with the matter. And then we have the Kremlin making these demands too. So, Don comes in, takes the thugs away for a cup of coffee. The thugs make these demands. So Kremlin is making these demands. They want ironclad veto on Ukraine's NATO future. Moscow wants guarantees that Ukraine will never join NATO as Trump's team pushes for a ceasefire deal. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Grushko insists that on a neutral status for Ukraine. No word on a 30-day ceasefire Ukraine agreed to in Saudi talks, and Putin and Trump are set to talk this week as negotiations intensify. Meanwhile, Russia threatens NATO troops in Ukraine, warning they would become legitimate targets in the war. So if you get NATO troops there, Russia are putting all the pressure on the US. The US are putting no pressure on Russia. Putin is demanding a halt to all weapons. This is the latest thing we're hearing from Bloomberg today. Putin is demanding a halt to all weapons deliveries to Ukraine as part of a ceasefire proposed by Trump. Russia views the suspension of US aid as a key condition for any ceasefire agreement. That's not going to come from Europe, though. Europe won't agree to that, even if the US does. And this could then cause future further friction between the US and Europe. US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has said those who disagree with territorial realities of the Ukrainian conflict, hoping to push out the Russians, risk provoking World War III. So he's now said, so the American position is the territorial reality, which might mean actually giving these territories to Russia. If you keep wanting, so Doris, if you keep wanting your house back, you're going to cause World War III, and we can't have that. So we have to give some of your house to the thugs. And anyone that wants it otherwise, any of you neighbours acting on behalf of Doris, you just want World War III. No, we want bloody morality, and we want goodness to prevail, and we want the law, we want the neighbourhood law to be maintained here. That's what we want. No, you don't. You want World War III, you bloody warmongers. No, we are defenders of Doris and supporters of Doris. We're not warmongers. We actually want peace. We don't want our houses invaded. Thank you very much, Don. Bloody World War III warmongers. To Tim Wald's Christopher Miller from the Financial Times says there's no indication that Trump and his team of negotiators have managed or even tried to get Russia to back down from its maximalist position regarding negotiations on ending its invasion of Ukraine, or even make the smallest of concessions. All the pressure from Trump, Walz, Rubio and others involved in the US side has been put on Kyiv, the victim of Moscow's war, to make concessions. Moreover, the messaging coming from the White House echoes long-standing Kremlin propaganda to the extent that it's nearly indistinguishable. So the answer to the Fox News host's question below is almost certainly that Trump and his team is being played by Putin. So she asked a really good question and he just laughs it off.
Along the border, how do you know President Trump isn't being played right now by Putin?
Well, look, that's almost laughable. I'll take President Trump in dealing with...
No, it's not laughable. And he just doesn't answer the question. Yeah. How do you know he's not being played? And that's a really good question. He is being played. Trump denies reports that his envoy, Steve Witkoff, was kept waiting for 8 hours when he visited Putin last, and he calls the media sick degenerates for making up stuff, even though that's pretty widely reported. It's just on the side of Russia. Ukraine is ready to ease sanctions against Russia as part of a peace deal, the envoy for sanctions policy told Politico. He said the economic sanctions on Russian energy imports have their own goals, which can push Russia to stop its aggression and force them to conclude a lasting peace agreement. So they're quite realistic on reducing sanctions on Russia to force them to stop invading Ukraine, right? I think Ukraine would take that. Elina Valtonen, Foreign Minister of Finland, has said, I think the genuine effort by President Trump to really achieve peace here should not be misused by Putin to further weaken Ukraine and come back with aggression at some point in the near future. Absolutely right. So Trump's peace desires shouldn't be an opportunity for Putin to further weaken Ukraine. And that definitely looks to me like what's going on. Tendar says, a German analyst says, anyone familiar with Putin and Russia knows that the chance for peace are virtually zero. We have been here multiple times and failed 100%. Macron, we will send peacekeepers to Ukraine without Russian consent. So Tendar continues, this war is only raging because Putin and his ilk never believed in peace or international treaties. The track record is clear and it will not suddenly start to be different. To say that a ceasefire is the best that can be achieved would be exaggerated because it would only happen if Putin believes it benefits him. It would never be a serious or persistent ceasefire. Europe should have moved into Ukraine a long time before. The last time when North Koreans appeared at the front line and supported the invasion of Ukraine. French President Macron's statements are therefore only logical and necessary. Move in. And David Lammy, the UK's foreign minister, said today or yesterday, if the Kremlin refuses to sign a ceasefire, the G7 countries will continue to put pressure on Russia. He said, so this is very different from the US positioning. He said that the UK is increasing the number of drones, ammunition and training, sending more than 400 different assets to Ukraine. And it's worth noting that, and here's a video of Putin doing this. It's worth noting that every time they agree to ceasefires and whatnot, they break them. And every time he denies that he'll commit some atrocity. He goes on to commit that atrocity. The whole thread of Putin vehemently denying he'll commit some atrocity before committing that atrocity. So this is Maxim Borodin doing this every time, all the time. There is ample evidence that they break ceasefires, they break treaties, and they commit atrocities that they deny that they'll commit. I'm not going to go into that. You can go and search it all up. Putin should drop absurd demands in peace talks with Trump, says the Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski. He said that yesterday it was his hope that Russian President Putin would abandon, quote, some absurd demands toward establishing a peace deal in Ukraine. So I think that these peace negotiations and the talk between Trump and Putin is just an opportunity for Putin to manipulate Trump. Trump will be putty in Putin's hands. Trump is a shit negotiator. He's just crap. And anyone that says otherwise hasn't actually looked at the detail of what Trump has done over time. It's pretty much that simple. And I think Trump is not a good negotiator because he doesn't have the requisite knowledge to be able to manipulate people. He just strong arms people. He's like, well, the US has all this power. I don't really need to understand you. I didn't need to know about you. I'm just gonna my negotiating strategy is to force you to do what I want you to do because I'm bigger than you are. Well, if that's what you call a great negotiator, then okay, whatever. But he capitulates completely to stronger people. So he's great at negotiating with weaker people because he just bullies them. But when it comes to stronger people, he actually gets bullied by them because he's not a good negotiator. Now, when it comes to NATO, Shashank Joshi reports from a Finnish outlet. Sources tell Iltalehti, so a Finnish outlet, that the assessment of the situation has changed over the last 2 to 3 weeks. In Finland, it is no longer considered certain that Trump would allow NATO commanders to use US troops in military operations versus Russian forces. In other words, we're getting this sense that the US isn't prepared to come to an Article 5 invocation, that essentially they're not interested in NATO. In fact, we can go to listen to Antti Scaramucci, who was part of the Trump 1.0 administration for a short while, here talking about that issue.
Back and look, but I think that John Bolton knows this stuff better than me, and I'm friends with John. He's the former national security advisor. John was very explicit about this. Donald Trump told John Bolton, if I win a second term, I will figure out a way to pull us out of NATO. And so the response was, well, you can't do it without the Congress. And Trump went back to him and said, yeah, but I'm the commander-in-chief. I could do it through executive action. In other words, I could just, if you were my Secretary of the Navy or Secretary of the Army, I could say, Caddy, stand down. And he has the right. He is the leader of the military forces. He's civilian leader of the military forces. Everything was excellently planned by these founders, except they didn't expect the arrival of Donald Trump 250 years after the Declaration of Independence. And so now you have this weird situation. And by the way, Caddy, I don't know if anybody brought this up to you, but the New York Post, which is one of our tabloids here in U.S., is saying, and the NBC poll, this is an NBC poll.
This is what we were talking about at the beginning when you were speaking.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe it's already been brought up, but
they go on to talk about something I couldn't remember where to finish that. So, yeah, this idea that actually Trump will pull the US out of NATO functionally. It might not be able to get it through the Congress. Marco Rubio changed the rules, so you have to have 60 Congress members to do that. And you probably wouldn't get that, although I wouldn't push it past. It's just crazy these days. But I don't think you'd get that because if all the Democrats stuck together, I think they would on that one, as opposed to the continued CR bill the other day or whatever. And you had 10 Democrats crossing the aisle. I think when it comes to NATO, hopefully you'd have a number of Republicans and all the Democrats voting against pulling out of NATO. But there are other things he can do. He can use his executive orders. He can, as we've already seen, he can stop doing European drills, training with Europe, leave Europe up to itself, and effectively pull the US's NATO forces or whatever out of Europe. So, there are ways of pulling out of NATO without formally doing it. The government will no longer, so this is going on to American things concerning the war in Ukraine or geopolitics more generally, but tangentially connected. The government will no longer require shell companies to disclose their owners and beneficiaries, allowing wealthy corporations and individuals to hide their profits from the public. This is just opening up the US corporations to be influenced by China, Russia. It's just absolute. So when I talk to you about which pot would you put this in, a pot that favors Ukraine or Russia, remember we do that with democracy. Does this pot favor democracy, transparency, lack of corruption or anti-corruption measures, etc., or does this pot favor corruption, oligarchy, obfuscation, murky dealings, and illiberal, anti-democratic moves, which whenever Trump or any government does something, which pot do we put that action in? And every single action of the American administration at the moment is putting it in the wrong pot. Every single one, in my eyes. To the point where Peter Zion is just listing them on a daily basis. This is one from actually some time ago now, although it's released 2 days ago. It's got March the 9th date there. Probably releases it to his own channel, his members or something first. But here he lists some of the things that I've been talking about.
Everybody, Peter Zion here. Let's see, let's start with the Defense Department. Secretary Hegseth has said that the reports that he gave the order to stop cyber operations defending against Russian cyber operations or disrupting their cyber operations was not actually true. He didn't say it in a statement. He just retweeted somebody else's newspaper article. I have no way of confirming that personally, but I will point out the original report came from within the Department of Defense, so I have my doubts. But for the moment, let's just take Hegseth at his word. Good, because the Russians have certainly not stopped hacking us.
Actually, there's a bit of the way I understand this is they haven't stopped cyber defending, but they have stopped offensive operations into Russia.
But if you look across the rest of the U.S. government, the trend is definitely in the direction of just lying back and let it happen. So there's something called, let me make sure I get this right, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This is the group that prevents the Russians from hacking the elections, either going after the hardware or participating in misinformation. It wasn't disbanded. It's just all the people were fired, and no one has been brought in to do the work since then. Second one comes out of the Justice Department, which Pam Bondi is the Secretary of Justice now, and Task Force Klepto Capture, which was designed to go after foreign assets held primarily by Russian oligarchs. They basically stopped that work altogether. So it doesn't matter where you got your money, if it's from theft or criminality or whatever else. If you're Russian, you're in the clear now. Investigations have stopped. And the third one is at the FBI, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Basically, if you're in the United States and you're a citizen and you're going to be doing work for a foreign government, you have to register as doing work for the foreign government. Well, not anymore. Donald Trump's team has fallen afoul of this act many times for either not reporting or reporting after the fact. And now you just don't have to do it at all. So we're on work for China, fine, it's not going to be enforced. You want to work for Russia, go for it. Turkey, take your pick. Okay,
and then he goes on to talk about other things as well, but he's doing this every day where he's just listing all the things, and again it's like the Russian reach. Is this pro-Russian or pro-American? And it's like, we're putting it in that, we're putting it in that one, we're putting it in that one, we're putting it in that one. The US has changed sides, and it's eating itself, and it's destroying its own democratic infrastructure, mechanisms and processes, and doing everything it can. The Trump administration is doing everything it can to favor those who would want to be corrupt. Doing everything it can to not be able to track where money is coming from and influence is coming from abroad. And it's just there. Like, you can't deny it. They're doing it. They've closed down these departments, or just sacked everyone in the departments. And then you can talk about the ONA in the DOD, like I talked about yesterday, this long-term strategizing department that's been shut down. Then you can talk about the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Liberty, the what's called the US MGA media group, et cetera, et cetera. Like every day we're hearing more and more departments or projects are being closed down and defunded. People are being purged and sacked. And every single day, all of those events are going into the pot that benefits Russia and China, that benefits corruption, that benefits obfuscation. Okay. Then we've got the US starting a fight with France.
Something different. There is now a member of the European Parliament from France who does not think the U.S. represents the values of the Statue of Liberty anymore. They want the Statue of Liberty back. So is President Trump going to send the Statue of Liberty back?
And by the way, the way that question is phrased by Peter Doocy there, that misses the message there, which was, if you are asking for all of that gifted aid to Ukraine back, then we as France can ask for the Statue of Liberty back. But that's kind of phrased as just an attack on the US. Actually, you need to understand the wider context of why that was stated.
Absolutely not. And my advice to that unnamed low-level French politician would be to remind them that it's only because of the United States of America that the French are not speaking German right now. So they should be very grateful to our great country. Kelly.
So that was just an excuse to get out that long-running gag, right? But of course, it forgets the idea that actually, if it wasn't for French, you'd be playing cricket right now. So I think a very cherry-picked historical understanding there, but the point is that you're seeing a very public display of antagonism. Yeah, you can argue that was from the French politician, but actually that was a French politician, not the French state saying that. This is the White House saying this. And also the point, as I mentioned, was a slightly different point from the French as far as I would read it. Michael McFaul, the former ambassador to Russia from the US, says, such a shocking, insulting statement about an ally from anyone, let alone a senior White House official. Who told her to say this? She obviously got it from somewhere. I'm hoping our press secretary knows that it's only because of the French that we have an independent United States of America. Lots of people piling in on that, and it's just this attack on allies that is really galling at the moment. We've got Melanie Joly, the foreign minister for Canada, talking here at the foreign ministers conference in Canada, where I think there was US presence.
Said to the secretary, is Canada's sovereignty is not up to debate. Period. There's no argument, there's no conversation about it, there's no need to talk about it. You're here, you respect us, you respect our sovereignty, you're in our country, you respect our people, period. Yeah, I think many of my colleagues coming here thought that this issue was still a joke. And that, this had to be taken in a humorous way. But I've said to them, this is not a joke. Canadians are anxious. Canadians are proud people, and you are here in a sovereign country, and so therefore, we don't expect this to be even discussed or clearly not laughed at. And so I think you should ask them that question today. The approach when it comes to a relationship with the U.S. and through my conversation with the secretary was we will put maximum pressure on the Americans. And meanwhile, we'll work on finding off-ramps. Because we know ultimately, at the end of the day, the Trump tariffs are going to hurt Americans.
So you've got this growing divide between Canada and the US to the point where Mark Carney becomes Prime Minister, and the first thing he does, breaking the norms of the last 100 and something years, the Canadian Prime Minister always goes down to the US and meets with the US first. He went straight to Europe, met with Keir Starmer in the UK and Emmanuel Macron in France, and met with the King in the UK as well. So Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has invited Zelensky to the G7 summit in Canada as well in June. Now, some people are seeing this as a bit of a genius thing. So you at the G7 summit, you probably should have heads of state there. And that means you've got Zelensky invited to be among people like Donald Trump. And there will be a lot of clamour for talking to Zelensky, and this will put Trump, Trump will understand that the G7 kind of favours Zelensky over there are some people talking about this being a very clever little move there by Carney, who the Canadians have the presidency of the G7 at the moment, so the seven most powerful nations in the world. Mark Carney said, I had an excellent call with President Ursula von der Leyen of the EU about the road ahead for the Canada-EU trade. Canada and Europe are strong, reliable partners. Now, the inference here is that Canada and US are not strong, reliable partners. So Canada and Europe are strong, reliable partners in the shifting global economy. That matters more than ever. We're ready to secure new transatlantic business opportunities together, favouring Europe over the United States. He said, we don't need another country to validate our sovereignty. We are sovereign. We can diversify our trading relationships, fully realise what Canada is, an energy superpower, and we are going to get stronger while those who take trade actions get weaker. In other words, the US. So they're going to take advantage of what the US is doing, get closer to Europe. He said as well, we are the most European non-European nation. The US is unifying the world against the US, essentially. Now, going back to this Radio Free Europe, Voice of America defunding situation, just a couple more things. Dave Keating says, my very first journalism job was an intern with Radio Free Europe when I was studying in Prague in 2002. RFE was set up in the Cold War to provide real facts to people in the Eastern Bloc to counteract Russian propaganda, but given that the US government is no longer interested in fighting Russian propaganda, in fact it's now helping spread it, the closure was probably inevitable. The suggestion by the Czech foreign minister that the EU should take over the funding is a good one. We need pan-European public service media. I'll be writing a Substack this week with possible options. So this is the Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky talking about taking the EU taking over the infrastructure of those institutions in Europe to do that work on behalf of the EU, and I think that's a really good idea. Then EU foreign ministers are discussing the US withdrawal of funding for RFE and RL, according to Kyiv Independent. EU foreign ministers are set to discuss the termination of the US grant that funded them during a meeting in Brussels yesterday, according to Kyiv Independent reporter in Brussels. Be interested to see if that what turns up there. China's version of Radio Liberty Voice of America celebrates Trump's closure of those institutions as a tool of cognitive warfare that became active during the Cold War and has already shown numerous flaws. The positioning of entities like VOA suggests that they should not exist in today's multipolar world. Just playing into the hands. Here's Global Times of China saying exactly what you'd expect them to say, and they're absolutely popping corks in Moscow and Beijing for sure. Sadly, the UK is axing our foreign aid because we're wanting to pay for our defence, and part of the budget. So the approach to do that was budgetary, as in we're not going to borrow more because we already borrow quite a lot. Germany's in a different position. They don't borrow much. They're changing their debt break rules, so they're going to borrow a load more to spend on defence. We can't do that. We borrowed an awful lot already, a bit like France. So where are we going to get the money from to pay for defence? Well, it's coming out of foreign aid bill, and that's going to include things like BBC World Service. So that is our equivalent of the VOA. BBC World Service, we probably don't realise it here in the UK because we just see the BBC World Service as a great thing, and it is great. I've been around the world and listened to BBC World Service, and we just take it for granted as it's just part of the BBC, right? But actually, that's our propaganda arm, if you like. That's the positive information about the UK arm that we have operating worldwide, and it is really, really important. Just when Trump is axing US international broadcasters such as RFE and RL and VOA, Britain's broadcasters have an excellent chance to broaden their audiences. However, UK ministers are exploring cuts to BBC World Service. But this isn't an ideological thing. This is we've run out of money and we've got to pay for tanks thing. So it's different. I'm not excusing the UK here, but I understand the UK's position far more. Well, I understand the American decision. I just think it's wingnut ideology that's aligned with Russia, Project 2025, and these nefarious entities that are really running the American government, Heritage Foundation, etc. Call to activism says Pete Hegseth, I don't care what happens in the Yemeni civil war. Talking about a lack of knowledge and a deep ignorance of geopolitics, we see that from Trump, and we're seeing it from the Secretary of frickin' Defense. Like, this is so damned ignorant that it just blows my mind.
We are pounding them militarily. By the way, to the Houthis, this isn't a one-night thing. this will continue until you say we're done shooting at ships, we're done shooting at assets. We don't want a long, limited war in the Middle East. We don't care what happens in the Yemeni civil war. This is about stopping the shooting at assets in that critical waterway to reopen freedom of navigation, which is a core national interest of the United States. And Iran has been enabling the Houthis for far too long. They better back off.
So he understands the outcome, which is we want trade to go frictionless through the Red Sea. I mean, it's super important, right? Because actually our trade routes, right, when you have armed forces, I've read you quotes from books before about this, Smedley Butler's very famous quote. You know, your armed forces are securing your national interests abroad, and that's generally trade. So your armed forces aren't global police forces. They are sorting out your ability to make money and have influence abroad, and having influence abroad is to give prosperity, so to make money. So essentially, your armed forces are, you know, as Smedley Butler said, they're a protection racket, really. Okay, we can add loads of complexity to that, but in terms of the Red Sea, that's what's going on. So to say that we're bombing the crap out of Houthis so that they don't hit the ships in the Red Sea is, yeah, I understand that. That's fully correct. But then say, I don't care what happens in the Yemeni civil war. Well, yes, you do, because actually, if the right people win in Yemen, or we get security in Yemen, or we can, you know, the reason why US gets involved in wars around the world is partly because of oil and whatnot. But the other side of that, you know, natural resources, the other side of that is we want peace, because then that allows for economic security in the region, and that allows for trade to take place in a frictionless manner. So, you know, that you should care what happens in the Yemeni civil war, because that should influence your understanding of what goes on in the wider Middle East, which should impact your economic strategy and your trade strategy. It's just deeply simplistic, I think. And that's what happens when you get a Fox News host in charge of the Department of Defense. It's so frickin' simplistic. We're hearing the Starlink system is now said to be routed through a White House data center with existing fiber cables miles from the complex. Wow. So Elon Musk Starlink expands across the White House complex. I talked to you the other day about how Elon Musk, one of his main interests in Doge isn't about saving money, it's about information. And if he has access to the government information, he can plug that into his AI model. And that is what other AI competitors would lack. He has a competitive advantage over OpenAI and et cetera, all these other AI models. And then if he's plugging Starlink through the White House data center, like if he's in charge of that, like the conflict of interests are staggering. And yet there he is at the heart of it all, and then getting more and more bang for his buck. That investment in Twitter was the greatest investment in history, I would have thought. And then, oh my goodness, like, so the information spaces around Trump, just like I said with Tulsi Gabbard, and referring to Ian Mars Chung and these kind of ne'er-do-wells of internet infamy, we've got Tucker Carlson saying stuff like this. I mean, this is outrageous.
I don't want to be dark. I know this is going to be clipped, but like at this point, Europe is so, and I love Europe, and I'm there constantly, and I have family there. I mean, I really love Europe, truly,
we hate you
as an American.
Yeah.
But like, it's so degraded. You know, I don't even want to say it. I'm not even going to say would it actually be worse or not. But it's pretty bad right now.
I'm just asking questions. Basically saying Europe would be better if Hitler won World War II. That's what that is. Tucker Carlson suggests Europe would be better off if Hitler won World War II. We all know what would have happened. He would have supported Hitler back then, just as he supports Putin now. Now, what he's also saying is Europe is so degraded against so many metrics. Education, happiness, quality of life, etc. European nations, I mean, not all. Europe is a plethora of different nations, a spectrum of countries, but many of them rate above the US for very many things. Okay, so to say that Europe is degraded is just a heinous, horrible thing to say, and to say we would have been better off had Hitler won. Or to intimate that is disgusting. So Tucker Carlson, but this is, you know, Heritage Foundation, Tucker Carlson, People like Stephen Miller, like I keep mentioning, all these people around Trump, these Project 2025 people, that's who are influencing him. And Steve Bannon, the whole Project 2025, well, the ideology is Heritage Foundations, but the way with which the Trump administration is doing their governance at the moment, there's muzzle velocity getting so much through because they're just more executive orders than you can cope with, more changes you can cope with, and no one can focus on any one thing. It's just too much. That is Steve Bannon. And interestingly and sadly, after he lost his role in the White House in Trump 1.0, he, probably adjacent to that as well, he was going around Europe starting up these populist, right-wing populist movements and organizations. And he was getting into bed with all sorts of ne'er-do-wells that you can see JD Vance and Elon Musk doing now as well. The right-wing Eurosceptic movements around Europe can all be tracked to Steve Bannon in degrees of separation. Well, with that, it turns out that Nigel Farage and Reform funding also profited. So Farage is now under investigation for failing to declare a whole host of benefits that he received from the US firm linked to Steve Bannon. Nigel Farage reported to Parliament over alleged undeclared donations. So that will rumble on. Steve Bannon has a lot to answer for. And it's getting to the point where people are in Europe, there's a really strong movement to boycott US goods. Someone on my thread, PS Mets or Peace Mets, saying, "Hey Jonathan, again, thanks for all your vids. About the US, I just kicked out Google and started using Vivaldi, a European web browser. I kicked out Google Maps and started using Here We Go, a European map. If people here on your channel have more ideas, they are welcome. And I think for all Europeans, I know by kicking out Google, my kicking out Google won't make a difference, but 500 million Europeans kicking out Google and another US tech will make a difference and boost our European tech. Maybe you can mention it in your vids. Just an idea." Absolutely. You do what you want, guys. That is definitely something that many Europeans are considering. And that's the extent to which Trump and his administration have damaged their standing in the world, certainly among allies, to the point where the Gridiron Dinner, according to Puck News, and it's an annual off-record white tie gathering of Washington, D.C. media and the political elite. So these are your elites, yeah. They didn't toast the president at its annual dinner for the first time in its 140-year history. Instead, they toasted the First Amendment. Now that's great, and I agree with that. You know, there is Pam Bondi the other day said, I'm here to serve. The Attorney General shouldn't be a politicized position, she said before her hearing or at her hearing. And then she was nominated and then became the Attorney General. And then she said, I'm here to serve Donald Trump as Donald Trump is going to serve us in the Department of Justice. In other words, it is a fully politicized position, and she is, as many in the government now appear to be doing, she is serving Donald Trump and not the American people and not the Constitution. So these guys then stood up and saying, we are not going to toast Donald Trump, we're going to toast the Constitution. And then in Europe, you get stuff like this happening all the time. If you think you should see like some of the work led by donkeys and other people really trolling Elon Musk particularly. But actually, you're starting to get this understanding. This is is this Brick Lane or somewhere in London? You're getting posters like this going up, and it's not only there, they're doing this widely. All the adverts against Elon Musk are going up around London and other places. This is the understanding that Trump, Vance, Musk, Nigel Farage, Putin are all kind of fascistic. You know, this is becoming quite a thing to see. People are going to take photos of all of this being put up in different places. So that's another place that's being put up. And in fact, they're going up around London now. So you can kind of dismiss this, but the opinion of many people outside of the US is that the US is becoming fascistic, that they are embracing authoritarianism to the point that we are giving these parallels to Nazi Germany of what is taking place in the Trump administration. Now, that could be just dismissed as, oh, Europe, whatever, stop your whining. But actually, you know, I think there's a lot in this, and you are losing your allies at the moment, isolating yourself, but then you're gaining, I suppose, other allies. Who are your friends now? China, is it going to be China? You're going to turn around on China? Because it's looking like you've done that with Russia, and you're trying to get friendly with Viktor Orban's Hungary and the AfD in Germany, and all these, like the most disreputable political players in Europe. That's who the Trump administration's friends are, and Russia. And it's not Ukraine. And here we are standing up for Ukraine, and the US is trying to do everything it can to disadvantage Ukraine, as it's compromised, I think. Anyway, that's enough from me. You guys take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.